Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 5 of Plant the Seed. You got Nathan, and you got Cameron, your your favorites.
Hello, guys. It's uh, it's been a long week, but we hope you have enjoyed the last four episodes. We are finally on episode 5. It's come quick.
But it has come quick. It was a long week, which is weird because even though it's been a week, like a long week, I feel like it's been just one long day because everything just like meshes together, and I can't separate anything anymore.
Yeah, there are no days. It's
No.
like of the week. It's just yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
I have day one and then the weekend. That's all. Like Monday through Friday has meshed into just one single long day, and Saturday and Sunday is my weekend.
Yeah, I feel that. Pretty much every day is the same for me. I do the same stuff except like on Wednesdays I do all my homework in one day, just
Hmm.
so the rest of the days of the week I don't have to do anything.
Right? I can't relate. I don't have homework. Yes.
But my little brother did all his homework the day it was due. I'm like,
Ooh.
man, that's why you're staying up late. So,
Ooh.
well, I'm also staying up late, but I'm doing something fun.
Right? Some people were saying that like even some teachers aren't like they're trying to get creative to keep the class going for what would be their normal class time. And some classes are just like ending part way through it, and people get like all this free time afterwards to do the homework before the next class, which is actually kind of cool. um I gotta imagine though, like you sit there and see a lot of these schools are able to condense their material down so that most people are starting the same time they would in a normal school, and they're done by like 12, 1 o'clock. And it's like, why was I going to school until 3:30, 4 o'clock if this entire time you had material where I could have been just in and out?
Yeah, because they like to waste your time.
Oh, it's nuts. I was just, you start to realize just how condensed a lot of that material could be, but they just don't.
Yeah, one of my teachers is like, I don't know if she's crazy or something, but she'll spend 45 minutes of the 1 hour class teaching, not even teaching well, like, doesn't even explain it. It's just she reads the PowerPoint word
Oh.
for word, a PowerPoint that she didn't make. She found it on the internet, and then just reads it off, doesn't explain it, and then gives us two or three assignments and says, "Due by the end of the hour." I'm like, we have 15 minutes. I'm not going to do three assignments on a subject I don't know in 15 minutes.
That's not good. That
Yeah,
sucks.
but now everything they give like all the assignments on Monday, and they're all due by Friday every week. So I just do them all one day.
Right. I think that's a little bit better anyways. I think that's a little more realistic to what you're going to have to deal with when you get to college. Because most of the time they'll assign a project and they'll tell you like when it's due, and you just start it and finish it whenever you're able. So you kind of have a little bit more flexibility depending on what class you have to be able to finish that assignment without having to rush, which is really nice.
Yeah, I just do all my stuff. Except for the next 2 weeks, I don't have to do any of my science work because she's re-uploading all the stuff that she did before it was all mandatory.
Mm.
So for the first 3 weeks of the mandatory work, I've already done all of it.
Well, there you go.
So I don't have to do it again, which is good. I was afraid I would have to do it again. I was about to cry.
That would have sucked. She would have gotten the same assignment. And would have
Oh yeah,
just, I'm not gonna redo it.
I saved every assignment for that purpose, just in case.
There you go.
I was like, I'll just resubmit it. I'm not doing it again.
Well, let's go ahead and jump into our quiz question here. So the last episode, episode 4, we kind of dove into this idea of patience and meeting God's expectations. And the quiz question we had for that week was, it's presumed that the world's longest continuous walk you can make is from Cape Town to Magadan, which I believe, if I remember correctly, was what, the bottom of Africa up to like the top of Russia or
Yeah.
something. And the answer to this is there is supposedly, like, you can Google map it. There is a walking path that you can take from one to the other, it would take you approximately 4,492 hours or 187 days of nonstop walking. Nonstop. And then on top of that, like if you were to break that down into something a little more realistic, which is still unrealistic, but if you decide to do 8 hours of walking per day, and without stopping, this is like you get no breaks, 8 hours per day nonstop, it would take 562 days for somebody to walk that entire thing.
I feel like um, I would get distracted. It would take me like twice that amount of time because you're going over multiple countries. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm definitely gonna stop in each country and like be a tourist because I've always wanted to travel. So if I'm just walking on one path through a bunch of countries, I'll try all your food,
Right.
get some clothes, see the pyramids.
What a cool experience that would be, though, to walk from one up to the other and just like see the change in culture as you like walk that path. I think that would just be really neat. Like you said, you'd have to stop. You'd have to go and really take and enjoy that, the cultures around you and the things that you can see, like the pyramids or whatever.
Yeah, you just see the pyramid of Giza and just walk past it. Don't even look. It's like, oh, that's cool.
Well, guys, while we're in quarantine and can't travel anyways, nobody said you couldn't walk. So, you want to get started, there's one path you can take. Explore that side of the world. But I don't know. I think that would be kind of fun. I would watch that. That would be a really neat like video series. Now, granted, I don't have the strength to be able to do it, so I don't think I would be the one to do this. But I'd watch it. Somebody just walking that entire path. That'd be kind of neat.
Yeah, I'd want to see a documentary on that. I would only try it myself though if like I had at least one or two other people with me. I couldn't do it alone.
Right. I wonder how far somebody could get without just running into the awful parts of people. Like,
Oh yeah.
without getting mugged. Like, how many days can you make it through without getting jumped?
You're walking through some large city,
Yep.
and you end up in the boroughs. It's like in some super ghetto area. You just have like some European gang come up on you.
No, that would not be fun. But, anyways, let's go ahead here. I feel like our title needs a little bit of an explanation. We're gonna
Oh yeah.
talk about it in segment 2. But do you want to kind of explain like what you've been doing with your quarantine lately?
I've been, aside from my schoolwork, been catching up on video games that I haven't been able to play because of doing schoolwork at school. So that's why I actually do all my work the first day of the week, just so I can have time to do stuff that I actually don't despise. So I've been playing The Witcher, which is really good if you haven't heard of it. And there's a Netflix show, which I haven't seen,
I haven't
but
watched it.
it's based off the games and the books, which are really good. Beat the second one. Like, I'm about 20 hours into the 200-hour game, which is the
Oh,
third one. Yeah, it's pretty long.
probably explains why I never finished the third one.
Yeah, including the DLC, it's about 200 hours.
Oof.
But now, so this is the perfect time to play. But the reason the title is Widow versus Witcher is because I was thinking of the Witcher games and everything, and the widow, she gave her money, all she had, which wasn't a lot compared to what the other people were giving,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't give all they had.
Sure.
She gave all she had, and she didn't expect anything in return. Whereas, like, a Witcher is somebody that they don't do anything unless they get paid. Like, their entire purpose is, I'm going to go help this person or this group of people for a compensation. It's a job, but it's just helping people with like some sort of task, like killing a monster, getting a cat out of a tree or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, imagine if you call the firefighter to come get your cat out of a tree, and he's like, "Pay me $500." I'm like, "You can leave the cat in the tree, sir."
I feel like they do that anyways, though. I don't know about the firefighters, but like, have you ever seen like a bill for somebody to use an ambulance? It's
Oh yeah,
like
ambulance bills are like,
insane.
I think they're a few grand. They're pretty expensive.
You can never use your life alert. Click that button, you're broke. It's
Dude, if I
over.
get shot, I'm walking to the hospital. I'll hop on my bike. I'll go. I'm not
Uh,
calling an ambulance. It'll cost more than the surgery.
8 hours a day, 562 days. I will limp to that hospital. Like,
Yes. Yeah. Imagine doing that 562 day with a bullet hole.
oh
It's like,
no.
it's when you no, you just have like a hand cut off,
There you go. You can do it. You'll be a
just bleeding for about 2 years.
yeah. You could just like you don't even have to stop. You could just rip your shirt up during that 8 hour per day walk and just wrap it up and keep on going. Oh, but yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about The Widow. If you're not familiar with the story that we're kind of comparing The Witcher to, or like in regards to the topic, we are going to go through that story in segment 2. But before we get to segment 2, let's go ahead and dive into segment 1. It's been a little while since we've kind of found a fun current event for us to kind of take a look at. If you guys haven't been able to tell, we try our best to just stay away from the COVID-19 like current event news. It's all over the place. We hear it all the time. I want some good news. I want some weird news, some different news. That local Florida news. That's what I want. But
Yes, that's the best news.
but our current event does not come from Florida today, but it does come from Japan. And this one to me is pretty wild. By the time that this podcast is released, this event will actually be going on. So it will be an active event. So if you're listening to this podcast on the Monday that it's released, you could do this. You could join in on this event. This event is FaceTiming with eels from May 3rd to May 5th. Apparently, Japan has an aquarium, and they are hosting a FaceTime event to keep the quote, like in quotes, this is the words that I found that were describing these animals for this event, but the skittish eels. You can go and you can FaceTime the skittish eels to get them accustomed to human interaction while like we're all in quarantine. I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, it's just kind of weird. It's like I know FaceTiming people is a normal thing, but you're FaceTiming a bunch of animals. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what a phone or a FaceTime is. They also can't speak. So honestly, I don't know what the point of that would be, except just a look at the animals.
I wonder how weird that's got to be for the poor eel. Like you're in
Yeah, the eel has
water.
no idea what's going on. They're being exploited.
And they said they're putting a bunch of phones, like they're putting a bunch of devices around these tanks so that like a ton of people can FaceTime in and stare at the animals.
Dude, those radio waves are definitely gonna mess up those eels.
They're gonna be a little more than skittish.
All those phones are 5G. Those eels are gonna die.
Oh my word! I thought that was crazy though. Like, why just the eels though? What if I want to go and watch
I
the
want to see a
monkeys?
dolphin. Come
Yeah, there
on.
you go. Just get me, put me on FaceTime by the little shark enclosure. They're skittish. They look scary, but they need friends.
Yes, fish aren't friend. I mean, fish aren't food. They're friends.
There you go. Maybe we got this all wrong though. Like maybe they're doing something that these eels really need and like we should all be doing this. Like maybe the Detroit Zoo or whatever, like maybe we should all be FaceTiming the skittish eels.
I'll be in a Zoom class with my teacher and be like, Julie, what did you guys do this week? I FaceTimed a couple eels.
So guys, you can either tune in to watch on May 3rd to May 5th the skittish eels, or I'll just put FaceTime by my cats and you guys can watch them and keep them company. That'd be a fun event.
My English teacher, we had a Zoom call the other day, and he left for a minute to like go make coffee or something, and his dog came up and just sat and stared at his computer.
That's awesome.
And we started talking to the dog, and he just started barking, and he's like, "What'd you guys do to my dog?" and yeah, it was quite funny.
That I feel like every Zoom class needs that. You need one camera on your teacher or whatever, but you need another camera on whatever pet that they have, and just to keep you entertained. If the eels need company, so do the dogs and the cats. So for one FaceTime a day, you could entertain an eel or another animal. Keep it in mind.
Yes.
But with that being said, though, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to jump into our segment two. And we'll talk a little bit about the widow if you haven't heard that story. And we'll just kind of dive into that kind of story. Hello and welcome back to Plant the Seed. We're going to go ahead and dive into our segment two here. Rather than do a summary of the story we're going to go over today, it's so small. Like, the summary that we could have written would have been longer than the story that it comes from. So we're just going to read the story. Story we're going to read is about the widow. If you're not familiar with it, there's two places in the Bible that you could actually go and read it. The first spot being Mark chapter 12. It is found in verses 41 through 44. And you can also read the account of the widow a second time in Luke 21, verses 1 through 4. And usually, if something's like repeated like that in the Bible, it usually has a fairly big significance, especially if it's worth repeating or sharing twice. There's usually some kind of like bigger picture or bigger meaning that whoever is sharing the story for a second time or third or a fourth time is trying to get across. And this is one of those stories that definitely has that. So the one that we're going to read is the one that shows up in Luke 21 verses 1 through 4, but they're pretty much like verbatim. They both share the exact same story. But it says, and he looked up, and this is referring to Jesus. And he looked up and saw the rich men casting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw also a certain poor widow casting thither 2 mites. And he said, of a truth, I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast in more than they all. For all these have of their abundance cast in unto the offerings of God, but she of her penury hath cast in all the living that she had. So to kind of give you an idea of what's happening here, you've got this poor widow who cast in what they call mites. At this time period, these are very, 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 very small amount of money. So this is, if you were to put it in terms of like what that financially was equivalent to, she really does not have a whole lot. She is literally offering everything that she has. Whereas like everybody else around her, they're very wealthy. They're casting in of what Jesus calls their abundance. So this is like above and beyond what they have as financially being able to give. They're giving of that abundance, while this lady is giving of all that she has. So a couple of things before we kind of dive into this. There isn't much in regards to a description of the widow. Like I don't know her name. I don't really know of her. There's nothing really provided other than calling her the poor widow. But I think there's a lot of important characteristic traits that we can kind of recognize with her. The first being is she gave willingly, not from an obligation. Nobody was forcing her to give, any kind of offering to God. She willingly makes the choice to do that, which I think is really important, and we'll talk about that later. But she gave without knowing what the outcome may be. These verses really describe the fact that she is giving everything that is going to help her live because she is broke. So she's giving out of sacrifice, I think. Like she's not giving it expecting that she's going to become a millionaire after she does this. So she gave without expecting a return on her gift. As a widow, she's probably giving regardless of heartbreak and grief. I don't know how long the time period is since she's been widowed, but I do think that there is an importance of why she's described as that. And the last thing here, and we're not going to talk about this topic in this one. Maybe we'll talk about it later. And I think this is an important topic, but she didn't need a man to glorify God. Like, she glorified God on her own. She had nobody that was like, you need to put in your small tithe into the box and walk away. She did this because of what she wanted to do in her own personal relationship with God. Um, so, kind of getting into, I guess, our questions or expanding on this topic or applying it to us, I'm going to just go off on a limb here and just call us all out, like myself included. So, like anyone listening, me, Cameron, you, everybody else, I think we as a people, believers and non believers, whether you believe in a God or you don't, I think we are all alike. Whereas we really aren't even willing half the time to give of our abundance to other people, whether that's possessions, time, money, whatever. To just be blunt, I think a majority of us are selfish. I think a lot of us are very self centered, and I think a lot of us are greedy. You know, Jesus was kind of getting after the ones that were giving of abundance. I think half of us don't give even out of that. So, has there been a time where I guess you could have done something selflessly for someone else where you just chose not to? I know it's
Oh,
probably.
definitely. As you said, like calling us all out. I'm sure everybody's been in this position before, but I would like to call myself a selfless person most of the time, and I care about other people.
Mhm.
But especially when I was younger, I was definitely not selfless at all.
Mm.
Um, like I'll have a friend at school, like when I was in like eighth grade, that said, "Can you help me with this assignment?" AKA, "Can you give me the answers?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll help you out. You pay me like $5."
Mm.
And they did. Obviously, that was not the right thing to do to sell answers. I should have just like helped them study. But I was like, if I already did all this work myself, so if I'm gonna help you, I'm gonna get something out of it because I'm the one that did all the work.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very 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 selfish on my part, but I think I've become a little more selfless. I mean, it's not a big thing, but like this one kid at my school, he's like a year or two younger than me. Every time I have like food after lunch that I didn't eat,
Hmm.
like, hey, you want that? And I plan on like eating it after school because I usually stay like an extra 2 hours after school every day.
Hmm.
But then every time he sees me, he's like, "Hey, you're gonna have that," and I'll like toss it to him. Not to like toot my own horn or anything, but it's it's more of a obligation thing. So unlike the widow, where she did it just because she wanted to,
Mm.
I gave to my friend because I felt I would feel guilty if I didn't.
Sure.
Like if I said no, you can't have this bag of chips. Like it's very selfish. So
Just rip it open, start smashing it in your mouth. Like, why?
yeah, just eat it in front of them. But yeah, I
Oh.
think it's like I've become more selfless and conscious of other people
Mm.
within the last couple of years. But even when I give stuff to people, sometimes it's like I'm not doing it because I want them to be better. I'm doing it because I don't want to feel guilty for not doing it,
Sure.
which is definitely not the right attitude to have. But following with that, uh, do you have like excuses that you usually tell yourself? Because I definitely do. My excuses are usually like, I earned it. I'm not going to do anything
Mm.
for anybody else, or stuff along those lines. So, like for you, when you don't want to be selfless, what is the reasons that you tell yourself like why you shouldn't?
I think it's a good question, and I think it really depends on different circumstances, at least for me. And I think it's changed kind of and evolved over the years of I as I've gotten older. Like as a kid, one thing where I could have done something selflessly and just never did. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember these. They had these things called silly bands, and they were like dinosaur
Yeah,
shaped, and they
yeah,
were they were huge. Like you were the coolest kid in school if you had silly bands. They're so stupid. I don't know why they were so popular, but
I don't know why, but we were all obsessed.
I wanted them all just because I thought that like everybody, if you had silly bands and you had them up your arm, you were the coolest kid in school. Don't know why. And they would snap. Like if they broke, they would like whip crack your arm and it hurt for a second, and then you were like, ow, that sucked, but you still wanted more of them, and you were actually sad because your favorite silly band broke.
when I
But
was younger, but I definitely had more than one.
there you go. Yeah, I did too. But I had more than one because what I would do is I would go up to people and be like, hey, I was a little con artist. I'd be like, if I give you
Yeah,
this,
just
then
sell
you gonna give me your silly bands, and then I'd sell those bad boys. Or I used to do this with Pokemon cards. I'd go up to someone who had like a rare foil card, and I'd be like, ooh, that's pretty. And I was like, hey, I'll give you 4 cards if you give me that 1 card. And these were standard, boring 4 cards. And I was like, you need these. And they were like, I do. And I would like rip off kids of their little cards. I was never
them.
just giving anybody anything. It was very take, take, take. Um, I yelled at my roommate one time for something stupid because he did something, and I was like, I do all this stuff for you. Why don't you make me a dinner? Like, why don't you do something? And it was really rough. So yeah, there has been a ton of time. Like, I feel like all of my years between like 19 and prior to that, like, I was not giving selflessly. It was always like, I need something in return. And over those years, the excuses that I feel I made for myself to at least try to justify that were things like, well, I want the silly bands. So I think I was making the excuse of more greed. I didn't want to identify it as that, but it was kind of self centered. Like, I'm going to do this because if I do this, I'm going to get something better in return, or that person's going to do something for me, or I can cash in a favor in the future. And so that would be the excuse of why I would try to do something. As I get older and I had different opportunities, a lot of the excuses that I would do was like, well, that person hasn't done anything for me, so I'm not going to do anything back for them. Or I always do something for that person and they come back and they stab me in the back, so I'm not going to do anything for them now. Like, they don't deserve it. And that's the excuses that, like, I feel in the times where I was not being selfless, all the excuses I used to not do something for someone else was because I wasn't getting something in return, whether that was attention or whatever. The reason behind the excuse, I think, was the exact same. I wasn't getting something, so I wasn't gonna do something for someone else.
Yeah, I really, really relate to that, like on a whole nother level. Especially with like the Pokemon card thing and how you mentioned exchanging favors.
Mm-hmm.
Exchanging favors is probably the most frequent thing I did through my first 3 years of high school.
Mm.
So senior year, I stopped doing it because I realized it was not the best thing to do. But I would throughout the first 3 years of high school, especially junior year, I got really, really good at it. I would do all of my homework, get all the answers, make sure they're all 100% correct, give them to people for free. I wouldn't like sell them the answers,
Mm.
but I would do it so that they would like me, so that when I asked them to do something for me, they would.
Mm-hmm.
And it always worked. So, like, I would ask somebody to do like a sketchy favor, like, hey, can you meet me here and do this? And they'd be like, why? I'm like, remember that those 100 times I gave you the work? They'd be like, I'll be there.
Right. And your relationship with that person, though, I think this is one thing that, if any of you listening find yourself in the position of like kind of relating to that idea of looking at kind of the reasons why you do things and being like, oh my goodness, that's me. I do something with the expectation that that person's going to owe me, or I'm going to get something back in return later on. One, I don't think you're alone. I think a ton of people deal with this. I think it's just kind of part of growing up as a human being. Like,
Yeah, it's like, especially what you just said with the growing up. I think with the whole expecting things in return, I guess the way I looked at it was like, why get something right now that I don't need, where I can make a good connection with this person so that later in life they'll know that I was there for them. So when I ask them for a favor, they'll do it for me because they owe me for all those years that I did stuff for them.
sure.
So like I could cash it in whenever instead of like, hey, if you give me $1, I'll give you the test answers.
I think you mentioned something really interesting in regards to future relationships with that person. Um, and I think that that's where some of those excuses we talked about. What are some excuses we use? And I think kind of the lie that we tell ourselves in a lot of those situations is that if I do this, it's going to strengthen my relationship with those people. And I can tell you from experience, and I think anyone who has selfishly kind of done something for someone else can tell you from experience that when you go to cash in that favor, when you decide to, rather than just do something for somebody else because you're not expecting something in return, when you go to cash something in, your relationship with that particular person actually gets worse.
Oh yeah, it's like I I can definitely vouch for that because it's like my relationships with the people would get pretty strong and we'd be good friends because I would always help them out.
Hmm.
And then I would go into cash in a favor, and they're like, what do I owe you for?" I'm like, "I gave you the homework." And they're like, "I thought you were just doing that to be nice." I was like, "No, no, I was not doing that to be nice. You owe me." And yeah, I did that for like 3 years.
I did that for a really long time, and the sad thing is because of me doing that more often and just kind of being all about myself and just selfish, a lot of the people that I did that to, I don't even talk to anymore. And not because like I don't want to, but because I kind of destroyed those relationships from constantly doing that. And to a point where I was doing it so frequently, it was like second nature, where I would do it with like family members. Like if I went and I did something for my grandma or my mom or something or whoever, I would go into like cash a favor later on. And it did have an effect on my relationship with my family. And what's so crazy is I don't even think I was hearing myself anymore. I think I mentioned in one of our podcast episodes that I went back to an old YouTube channel I used to record videos with a friend of mine. And within the first 2 minutes, I was like insulting him. I don't even remember that person. And I look back at it now and I'm like, oh my goodness, no wonder why like certain people aren't around me because it was just awful.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to looking back on my past self. It's like this one person that I knew from church camp that I worked with. We got pretty close in a very short amount of time.
Mm.
And so, being a little 10th grader, I was like, I don't, I don't know how to act. So I acted really dumb with this person
Mm-hmm.
and said the wrong stuff that I thought was definitely the right stuff to say. Definitely, it was not the right stuff to say at all. But looking back on it, like 2 years later, like this person isn't talking to me anymore. Not because of the reason they said. It's because they thought I was a total idiot, which I
Right.
was. So I can definitely relate to what you were saying. Is like I look back a lot of the people that don't talk to me anymore. It's not because they're mean. It's because I usually did something to offend them,
Sure.
or they think I'm just stupid.
Right. I think one other thing too, kind of wrapping this into the story of the widow, where I think a lot of Christians tend to do things with this expectation of something in return comes from serving God or doing something at church. And I think there's this misconception for people, and this definitely includes myself because I find myself doing this every once in a while, and maybe you can relate to this as well. But doing something for the church or doing something at a function with the expectation that God is going to instantly give you something in return, whether that's financial gain or peace on something that you're not peaceful about or whatever. And I feel like the times that I've personally done that, my relationship with God starts to like get really negative because I feel like, oh, he abandoned me or I did this for God, so now he owes me. And it's just those times have never been good. I'm never satisfied when I'm doing that. I just like find myself more angry.
Yeah, it's like um, I definitely think some people. I can't really relate to this one too much, but from people that I know, they're like if I pray to God or like promise God I'll change myself,
Mm.
then I'll get this. Or like if I give my tithe, my 10% every week,
Mm-hmm.
then he'll make me a millionaire. And it's like I've never really thought of it like that. Like if I do something for God, he'll do something for me because
True.
I'm not that big of a deal. But I definitely know it's a big problem with some people that's like if I pray for a car, I'll get a car. Or if I say, God, I promise I'll stop doing this if you just do this for me. I'm like, that's not exactly how it works, buddy.
Yeah.
I definitely I see that a lot, especially with the people I know personally, and it's it's more common than some people might think. And it's not like I'm not gonna like shame them for it, but because I mean I do see why they do it. They're like God is
Sure.
all powerful. If I pray to Him, He'll give me what I want. Like I understand why they
Right.
do it. I completely understand. But it's like if you knew who God was, then maybe you would do stuff for Him because you want to do stuff for Him, rather than like if I give give my tithe, I'll
Right.
get a Lamborghini in next year. Like no,
Yeah, there's this term in like business that I think really applies to kind of this concept, and it's called a return on investment. And the idea behind it is that whatever choice that you make sure that you're doing it where you're going to get a return back. So if you're going to make a choice to invest in something, then make sure that the return on investment is going to be preferably greater than what you originally put in. And I feel like that probably applies a lot to this story too. You have these people who are giving of their abundance. It's not a sacrifice for them to give. They're giving of what they have, and I think with the intention of getting a return on investment, something that's going to be greater or equivalent to what they gave. And when you look at the widow, she gives everything without knowing what's going to come back, without expecting a return on investment. And I think that that's how we really need to be in our relationship with God or with our relationship with one another. You know, we should really be doing something not expecting that it's going to be an investment that we're going to make a return on later, but knowing and willing to do something without expecting that you're going to get something back.
yeah, I definitely like the financial thing that you said. It's I was thinking of an analogy for it, like the stock market. Um, God does not work like the stock market.
Mm.
If you put in your stocks into Apple, you wait about a year,
Mm-hmm.
get like half multiplied by 1.5 times or 2 times your money.
Mm-hmm.
God doesn't exactly work like that. Like you can put focus into Him and do stuff for Him, which is cool and all, especially if you're doing it for the right reason. But
Sure.
like if you invest your tithe, that does not mean you're going to get all of that back. You could be like Job and get broke and have your house burned down, even if you give your tithe.
Sure.
Just because you do good stuff does not mean good stuff will happen, which we talked about in another episode. That like not every good thing is going to happen to you just because you're being good.
Sure.
Like I'll give my tithe. God will treat me good. That's like the whole Catholic thing of the paying for uh, your salvation or doing the prayers.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I do these Hail Marys, God will love me. Like no, he's not this. He's not Wall Street. Um, God does not work on Wall Street. That should have been the title.
There you go. I think that we take for granted a lot of times or try to overcomplicate some of it. And you know, kind of wrapping into our final section of this segment, you know, when we give selflessly for God's purposes or for God to use us, while we may not ever see the effects of how that applies to other people, I think that God sometimes does allow us to see Him working. So in what times have you actually taken the opportunity to selflessly do something for God or for somebody else? And how have you seen God use you or work through you when those opportunities have been taken selflessly?
Oh, yeah. So I think my best example would probably be working at church camp. And we talk about this with the staff, and our executive director, Chad. He said, like, if you were here for the money, you wouldn't be here. And that's what I tell everybody. I'm like, if I wanted to work at church camp because I wanted money, I just want to be working at church camp because you don't make that much.
Sure.
But the reason I love working there is because I'm able to influence people and help people. And I think this summer alone, there was like 7,000 or something. I don't remember the exact number, but there was quite a lot of young people saved,
Hmm.
and like over 20 something thousand were on the campus. Like, I don't need to get paid a lot of money because the satisfaction of like, being able to help these people is good enough.
Sure.
So I said that's probably the only really good example I can think of.
I do think that, even doing something selflessly without expecting anything in return, I think that when you do something for God, it might not equate to some kind of financial compensation or anything, but I do think that there is something special and doesn't have an equivalency in things of the normal day to day that you get to see and experience by watching somebody else experience something that comes as a result of God working through whatever opportunity He may have provided. Um, like you had said, seeing somebody get saved and experience that relationship starting to, I guess, build or grow with somebody who is trying, I think is really really cool. That otherwise you might have missed out on had we done something with a selfish mindset of I'm gonna do this because I want financial gain. I think you end up robbing yourself more of
Yeah.
an experience.
Yeah, I know one of my coworkers there. He was new this year, and after like the first 2 weeks, he got his first paycheck, and he was like, "Oh, that's not a lot at all. I'm considering quitting." I'm like, "Why would you do that?" Because it's like, yes, we don't get paid very much at all, at all. It's not much, but the real benefit of working there is the experience. Like, especially if you live on campus like I did, you get to become close with a lot of new people that you didn't previously know,
Mm.
and you get to experience each week with all the campers. And like, I love the staff, but like getting to meet all the campers, having fun with them,
Mm-hmm.
especially like when I work on like the zip line and I get to send them down. And like this one kid is like really scared, but I helped them through it and put them on. I'm like, it's really satisfying,
Yeah.
especially because like the recreational stuff, which is most of the stuff that I do, is like obviously I'm not standing at a pulpit preaching when I'm on the zip line, but how my boss explains it, it's like all the stuff that we do here is like to give them a good experience
Sure.
so that they're more willing to listen. So I guess that's like why I do it. Obviously, it's not for the money, because if it was for the money, I wouldn't be there. But it is very, very fulfilling. So I suggest, like, if anybody's looking for a job next summer, g- go to a church camp. They're really fun.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that kind of is a perfect spot to kind of transition, I guess, into our last segment here. And to share a little bit about different places that you can get involved, that you can go and you can serve in a selfless way. I can't. I feel like it would be wrong of me to say like if you go and you do something, you're going to get anything in return. Again, I don't think you should do it with that anticipation of doing something in return. But I do think God really blesses those people in a lot of different ways who are willing to sacrifice their own self for the honor and glorification of God, whether that's financially or of their time or whatever the case is. Beacon has a ton of opportunities for people to do that, to selflessly give of their time or however they can Um, I mean, if you're an adult at the church, like you talk to the front desk, I'm sure they could give you a huge list of different opportunities and areas. But we have a lot for teens too as well. So if you're from Beacon and you're trying to get involved, you're trying to find places as a teenager that you can do something. There's Vintage. You know, Vintage is our nighttime service that is specific to students. I think kind of the quote that we use is, or not quote, but I guess you could say saying or tagline is that it is, you know, student led, student run based outreach in our community, which is great. So we're always looking for greeters, just people who are willing to be a friendly face to say hi to new people or people that are there. You've got Vintage Band, which Cameron, you're in that, I believe, right?
Yeah, I play violin in the band, which is, as you were saying, helping in the church. It's like you don't get anything out of it. I know people have asked me before, like, do you guys get paid for being in the band? No, we do not. It is strictly volunteer work. We give our time and our talent, not because we get anything out of it. It's really fun, and I've made a couple new friends by doing it, and also I just love music. But it's a way to worship with other people and lead worship. It's very satisfying, and it's just fun.
Yeah. If you let me put it this way, if you are looking for a place to serve at your church and you're doing it with the question in your mind or in your heart of whether or not you're going to get paid for it, don't do it. And I know that sounds pretty crazy, and there might be people that disagree with that, but I think if you are going to serve in some capacity within the church, you need to make sure that your heart is in the right place, or you're not going to get anything out of that experience. If you're doing it with the expectation that you're going to get paid, you're going to be very disappointed. I think you're going to find yourself in a really rough patch or spot, I think, in your own personal life, because I think it's for the wrong reason. But you've got Vintage Band. You have audio and visuals within Vintage. I know that they're always looking for help or places to serve in that area. You got this podcast. We're always looking for people who are willing to be guests, you know, on here, join in on topics. I'm more than happy to teach people how to use mic setups and everything as I learn how to do it. Or, you know, it's still fairly new for me, but you know, if that's something that interests you, you're not in front of people. You're by yourself in a room doing recordings and editing. So it's kind of neat. And most importantly, I think this one's really cool. Get creative. If you have a talent and a skill and we don't necessarily offer that, don't let that deter you from not turning that into something that you can use for God. The church that I used to go to, there's a lot of people who were very skilled with soccer. They loved soccer. It was this big thing. And a group of people at our church decided, hey, we're good at this. We can use this for God. Let's do something. They created a soccer camp that they did every summer where they invited kids in the community to come to it. And in the first hour or so of the day, they taught them how to play soccer. And in the closing of the day, they had like a VBS or like a vacation Bible school where they taught them different lessons and stuff. It was awesome. So
Yeah, that is really cool.
yeah, so if you don't necessarily, you know, if what we've mentioned so far doesn't necessarily interest you or pique your interest, nothing wrong with that. It's not for everybody. But take something that you do have, and you have tons of opportunity to get creative with that. And if you're doing it without expecting something in return, and you're doing it for God's glory, I know that God can, you know, use that to do something amazing.
Yeah, and it's like, even if your church doesn't have anything for you, working for God in a church is obviously the typical thing to do. It's easier because you're with other people. But if you have a talent and there's no room for it in the church, you can always do it by yourself with other people that have the talent. Like, personally, for me, I'm going into the film field for cinema, like being a film director and screenwriter. And we don't exactly have stuff like that at our church that I know of, at least. But I can always make movies about God or for God, or just make like regular movies. And if they get popular, use that platform to spread the word. Because it's like, you don't need to be a preacher or work in the worship band to help out, or like be a good witness. If you got a talent, I'm sure it could be used. It doesn't really matter what it is. You, if you're good at public speaking, just like go stand on the street corner and tell people. It's like you can do anything.
Right. Yeah, if you're listening to this and you're from Beacon and you're looking for a place to serve, again, feel free to ask our welcome center. It's the front desk as soon as you go through our front doors. If you're a teenager and you're looking for something, talk to the youth leader, talk to your small group leaders. Let them know you want to try something. One really cool thing at Beacon is we got a lot of people who are willing to be creative and try something new. So you got an idea, throw it out there. Let's see what we can do with it. If you're not necessarily from Beacon and you're listening to this and you're involved at a local church or somewhere else, talk to your pastor. Talk to the people at your church. Get creative and try something there. I don't think that there's any limit at what God can do with your skill. So, don't set yourself short either. You want to do something special for your community, see what you can do. And I'm sure if you're doing it for the right reason, that God can use that to really, I don't know how else to explain it than to just say, do something that's just really crazy. Until you try it, I don't think you'll know what I mean by that, but God can work in really mysterious and crazy ways. So with that being said, though, you want to go ahead, Cameron, and kind of throw out our trivia question for this episode?
Yes, trivia time.
Trivia.
My favorite segment. So this one that Nathan found actually was in August of 2015 in Dorset, Minnesota. I was reading this and
it's nuts.
I'm about to cry. It's so fun. This is really funny. In Dorset, Minnesota, in August of 2015, it was voted in the country's youngest mayor ever. How old was this mayor? It will surprise you.
It surprised me. It surprised me so much when I saw it. Like I was Google searching like different random facts to try to find a trivia question. I stumbled upon this one. I thought it was so unreal that I Google searched as many articles as I could to make sure that this was actually accurate. And it is. In Dorset, Minnesota, they voted in 2015. At the time, maybe it's changed now. I think, although knowing the answer, I don't see how it could be any different. But August 2015, Dorset, Minnesota voted in the country's youngest mayor. And it is legitimate.
I opened, before we started recording, the file for the notes for this episode. And I just scrolled down and I saw it. I think I might have shed a tear. I laughed so hard. I fell off of my bed. It shouldn't be that funny because it's just a thing that happened, but it is quite comical. I'm trying to hold it together right now.
We'll give a bigger explanation when we give the answer in the next episode, and I'll share with you some of the things that the youngest mayor put into effect, like first things when he was voted in. I cry. It's hilarious. It's the best, and it would be something like a small town in some place. It's great.
Yeah, it's like I happen to think that our president Donald Trump is quite a funny person. Whether you agree with him or not, you got to admit the dude's got jokes. He's funny. This is way funnier than Trump could ever be. This is the funniest thing I've heard in my entire life.
Alrighty, well with that, we can't wait to get the answer for this one and jump into it as like just a topic to discuss, because America, you're doing things, you're going places.
Yeah, we're doing this the right way. I love our government.
This kid can run for president now. Think about that. He's set. He can do this.
Dude, if this kid gets elected president in 2020, I will lose my mind.
All right. Well, until next time, everyone, remember to be different, do different. We'll see you next time.